What up, psychos? It's the Gov here, and we are diving into the Scarifyer crypt this week with one of our archived episode, King versus Kubrick on The Shining. Now, this episode was recorded originally back in August of 2019, so if some of our references seem a little dated, that is why. In the meantime, please head on over to social media, like, share, subscribe, our Twitter, our Instagram, our Facebook, our YouTube, all of it, Scarifyer. And now I turn the mic over to, well, us, for The Shining, King versus Kubrick.
Stanley Kubrick, Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, and a very pissed off Stephen King. And the only rooms available at the hotel is 237 or 217. You pick. It's The Shining on the Scarifyer podcast.
To a new world of gods and monsters.
I have a real problem with The Shining, and Stanley Kubrick knew that I had a problem with The Shining. I had a discussion with him beforehand. He said, "Stephen, Stanley Kubrick here. Don't you agree that all stories of ghosts are fundamentally optimistic?" I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, if there are ghosts, it means we survive death, and that's fundamentally an optimistic view, isn't it?" And I said, "Well, Mr. Kubrick, what about hell?" And there was a long pause on the telephone line, and then he said in a very stiff and very different voice, "I don't believe in hell."
All right, Psycho Nation. In one corner, you have a man who is regarded as the greatest filmmaker of all time, and in the other, you have the master of horror suspense, Stephen King, whose last name lives up to his monarchy in the horror genre. Stanley Kubrick versus Stephen King in The Shining. But real quick, we're going to give you a very brief backstory on the production of the film The Shining. After the disappointment of Barry Lyndon in 1975, Stanley Kubrick wanted his next film to be commercially viable. After locking himself in his office with a stack of horror books and infamously flinging the ones he didn't like across the room, Kubrick's secretary, after some time of not hearing books hit the wall, entered the office to seek Stanley Kubrick engulfed in The Shining by Stephen King. Released May 23, 1980, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining was released, though not a critical success, it was the financial success Kubrick was looking for, making $44.4 million on a $19 million budget.
Very good.
So, what we wanted to do with this episode is we didn't want to go into the numerous film theories about The Shining. We didn't really want to go into the at least 3 episode length long production history of The Shining. But we did kind of want to take a look at this age-old debate of which is the superior version, the Kubrick film or the King novel, or at least talk about why they're so different.
So where do we start? There's a lot to dig in there.
Yeah.
So why don't we start out with some minor changes from movie to book?
Sure.
So, in the book, he's not Jack Torrance. He's John Torrance.
Yeah.
Big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about this in the intro. In the book, it's room 217. In the movie, it's 237.
Mm-hmm.
Main reason why this was changed is it was requested by the Stanley Hotel.
Yeah.
That Kubrick pick a room that didn't exist
Mm-hmm.
in the hotel as to not scare future guests.
Yeah.
I mean,
and again, then you get into those crazy theories of like that's the difference between the Earth and the Moon, and a bunch of crazy things.
You know what? I really don't think the number of the room really makes a difference. I think they were just doing a solid for the hotel that they were letting them film at.
I buy that. I'm sure they didn't want to lose business.
So now some more major changes from book to movie. So the very nature of the story itself is kind of different. See, with Stephen King, he made a traditional haunted house / haunted hotel story. Or he wrote it, I should say. He didn't make it. Which featured real ghosts, real ghouls, and that really played a factor on John. And let me just get this out. As we compare, I'm going to refer to Jack as Jack from the movie, and John as we talk about the book. Just
to keep them separated.
Keep them separated so no one's getting confused. So, in Kubrick's movie, it is a haunted hotel, haunted house, but Jack's descent into madness is more ambiguous.
Yeah.
It seems to mostly take place in his mind until we obviously find out at the end that there are actually ghosts in the hotel.
Right.
Gov, what do you got to say about that?
Well, I mean, just real quick on the name change of the room number. Yeah, I don't think it's a big deal. I think, like you said, they were just doing a solid to the Stanley Hotel. I feel like you hit it on the head where Stephen King was trying to write a straight up ghost story. Sure. Haunted house, haunted hotel, whatever you want to call it. It's a ghost story. I don't think Kubrick was interested in that at all. I think he deliberately made it vague. Even down to the small details that the ghosts in the film don't look like ghosts. They look like human beings. And then you play off the idea of, like, is it conscious or is it all in their head? You know what I mean?
Sure.
So, and it's interesting on the way that Kubrick saw the film as opposed to the novel. His view on The Shining was very different than Stephen King's, and I think that's where this issue comes about, is they saw the material completely different. On the Kubrick side, he went on record and said, there is something inherently wrong with human personality. There's an evil inside all of us. One of the things that horror stories can do is show us the archetypes of the unconscious. We can see the dark side without having to confront it directly. So he was more focused on the evils and darkness inside human beings, whereas in Stephen King's novel, they're all normal human beings. You know what I mean? They're all normal characters, especially John Torrance.
Yeah, well, I mean, the family's definitely a wholesome family, a loving family. In the book,
Everywhere you look, there's a heart, a hand to hold on to.
whereas when we first meet Jack Nicholson, you know he's already batshit crazy. You know that there's some serious issues within this family.
Oh, sure.
And it's kind of like their last-ditch effort that they're trying to make this work.
In the novel, the family's very optimistic. I haven't read the novel in a couple years, but I do remember it pretty well. My impression of the family in the beginning is that they're a struggling family. They have a lot of problems. They have a lot of family issues that reside in their past. Both John and Wendy had abusive parents to a degree, to which John's father's issues start to reflect on him with the whole alcoholism thing and everything like that. And then John getting the job at the Overlook Hotel, they're optimistic as in, like, we have a fresh start. You know what I mean?
Right.
Whereas in the film, I feel like Jack is pushing his family to go there.
Yeah.
He's kind of dragging them there for his own financial gain kind of thing, to make himself feel like a winner kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and therein lies the difference. You have, in the early family dynamics, a struggling family that's optimistic for a fresh start versus a father/husband who's almost resentful of his family because he could be potentially being held back by them.
What did Stephen King feel about the casting of Jack Nicholson, and who would he have preferred? Is there, Gov, do you know anything about that, or is there information on that?
I do. I think this was Stephen King's first red flag. When Stanley Kubrick wanted to cast Jack Nicholson, Stephen King felt like that this was a mistake. He felt that Jack or John Torrance needed to be an everyman. He needed to be a man who is warm and is loving and is a good father, and then we see the tragedy of his descent into madness. You cast Jack Nicholson, as we said, he's already fucking nuts.
Jack.
He's Jack, man. He's already there. He's just got to put you there. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's who you get. You get Jack Nicholson to be Jack Nicholson. He can do two things really well. Insanity, crazy over the top, or depressing tragedy. Here you got a mixture of both. For who King wanted, he had a couple suggestions. John Voight, he saw Michael Moriarty. His top choice, believe it or not, was Christopher Reeve. Superman himself. He wanted to be
Superman,
John or
boys
Jack
and girls.
Torrance. I would have loved to see that.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Knowing how great and accomplished Christopher Reeve was as an actor, besides Superman, I would have loved to see that.
absolutely. I mean, I can't agree with you anymore there. That, I mean, let's face it. I mean, Jack Nicholson, this is an iconic role for him.
But I was just about to say, but with the movie we got,
yes,
Jack Nicholson was absolutely perfect for it.
Right.
The movie that Stanley Kubrick wanted to make, there was only one choice, and it was Jack.
Sure. Differences between movie and book. So, in the book and in the movie, both Jack and John are writers. With John in the book, he is a playwright who abandons his original play idea, and after finding a scrapbook on the history of the Overlook Hotel, he begins to write a book of the history of the Overlook Hotel, which begins his descent to madness. Now, Jack, on the other hand, it's not really defined what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's, what we really get out of this movie is he's just looking for isolation to write.
Right.
We don't know what he's interested in. We don't know what his specialty as a writer is.
Yep.
He's writing.
Jack in the film, you get the sense that he's an aspiring writer who has horrible writer's block, and he wants this isolation to really hone in and focus on his work. You can tell he really wants to make it as a writer, and again, going back to that resentful nature, being husband to Wendy and father to Danny, and Danny with his needs, which we'll get into Danny's character in a little bit. He feels like he's been really held back. He lost his teaching job, and there's a great moment where he's blowing up at Wendy, and he goes, "You want me to just take these odd jobs and shovel driveways and pretty much keep me down," kind of thing.
Right.
Whereas in the book, again, John is the same. He's an aspiring writer, recovering alcoholic, which is all the same. But he certainly doesn't hold it against his family. In the family, in the novel, John more or less blames himself for the issues that is going on with the family. To which, so before we get to the point in the book, they contemplated divorce on both sides of Wendy and John. John even contemplated suicide with the notion of they'd be better without me. He thinks he's the poison,
right.
Whereas I think Jack thinks it's the other way around.
Right.
You know what I mean? And when John is writing his novel in the book, he starts one, but then he finds the scrapbook at the Overlook Hotel, and that's what inspires him to start a brand new play, which is the history of the Overlook Hotel, and that allows the spirits of the Overlook to kind of put this dark shadow over John, letting him go nuts.
Yeah, I mean, And it definitely seems in the movie that the isolation is what gets to Jack.
It really is. It's kind of like that cabin fever paranoia. But I do want to point out, in the film, we do see the scrapbook. It's never brought up, and it's never really said out loud that that's the scrapbook about the history, the traumatic, crazy history of the whole Overlook Hotel. But it is there on Jack's desk.
Right. A little Easter egg.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a break from, Jack for a bit. Let's talk about another character. And, people, there's always a moment in this show where I can admit I probably piss a lot of people off. Brace yourself, because this is that moment. In the book, Wendy Torrance is a beautiful blonde. In the movie, it's Shelley Duvall.
Enough said. Enough said. I don't know how much more I can add to that. You nailed it. Exactly that. You know what? Again, it's completely different in characterizations. Jack/John have it, and they super have it with Wendy.
Well, in the book, Wendy's a much more stronger character.
She is.
Much more independent. And Shelley Duvall is Shelley Duvall. She's a basket case. I say that with no disrespect, but that's how she comes off in the movie.
Well, it's funny with how now knowing how Kubrick treated her making this movie.
That is true.
He tortured the poor woman.
He did.
To get a certain performance out of her.
Right.
Which I understand. That's a director's tactic. That's a director's choice to try to drive an actor to give the best performance they absolutely could. But, yeah, he was unceremoniously hard on her and harsh with her.
Very much so.
And there's a lot.
And, nothing but respect to Shelley Duvall.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, silly jokes, people, silly jokes.
But again, like, the characterization changed so much that, like what we said with Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall's perfect for this version of Wendy Torrance.
Of course.
Because in this movie, she's not a strong, woman trying to save her family or trying to save her son. She's a very meek, timid, mouse-like character who's really only, the way Kubrick describes it, is there just to be stupid and scared. You know what I mean? That's how he saw the character, and that's how he wanted Shelley Duvall to play her. Whereas in the novel, Wendy is very different just in looks and then just in characters. And also she has this hang-up that she is obsessed with being Danny's favorite parent.
Right.
So, again, it kind of goes to that broken family narrative that's in the book of you got Wendy who's constantly almost trying to put down John or twisting Danny's brain around him and constantly poking and prodding about his accidents with alcoholism and accidentally hurting Danny years ago, just so she can seem like the MVP in her kid's eyes.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's a personal hang-up she has in the book. She wants to be the most loved parent.
Right.
Which is not the Wendy in the film.
Well, I mean, we mentioned him. Let's talk about Danny a little bit. Gov, what can you give me about Danny from the book as compared to the movie? You've read the book a lot more recent than I have. It's been well over 12 years since I've read the book. Mm-hmm. I do remember that the voice of the little voice he talks to.
Tony?
Tony, yes.
His imaginary friend, yeah.
His imaginary friend. I know in the book that he manifests and he actually sees Tony.
Yeah.
In the movie, Tony's hiding in his throat and talking through a finger.
Exactly. Yeah, and I really don't want to put this over, but there was a made-for-TV film in 1997, I believe, specifically called Stephen King's The Shining, and it was executive produced by King, and it was also, I believe, he handled the screen adaptation. Which, by the way, Stephen King wrote a draft of The Shining in 1978 or 79 for Stanley Kubrick. Kubrick never even read it.
Well, that's Kubrick.
Kubrick had his vision. He knew what he wanted, and he certainly wasn't going to let somebody like the author get in his way.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of Danny, there's not as many differences, I want to say, between book Danny and film Danny. One of the things that the miniseries did right was they had that manifestation. And they also did something interesting where they had the same actor who played Tony play the grown-up Danny at the end of the film. So that was done okay. The biggest difference, I want to say, between the characters, film versus book, is that in the book, Danny is much more highly intelligent. He's written as a very intelligent 5-year-old, and he uses big words and he has extended vocabulary. In the film, forgive me for saying, he's almost autistic, and I feel like that was kind of the direction.
Is he autistic, or is he just a kid of his age?
When it comes to how he reacts to his ability to, quote, shine and either see the future or see these visions and stuff like that, it is, to me, comes off like it's a commentary on autism, which very well could be possible.
Could be.
Especially when, they're saying he has seizures and blackout episodes, stuff like that.
But
that's just me.
Yeah, I can give you that, but I do know in the, I believe the book and then the made-for-TV series, we got a Danny who's watching, like Sesame Street and other learning.
Electric Company.
Yeah. And other, educational TV shows where in Kubrick's film, he's, like every little boy, he's watching the Roadrunner.
Which I always made the comment of, like, there's a reason why he's watching Roadrunner cartoons, because he fakes out Jack at the end in the maze like Roadrunner would fake out the coyote.
Well, of course.
Of
course.
So again, like, everything's in a Kubrick movie, everything is done for a reason.
Right.
But besides that, there's really not a whole lot different with Danny. I will say that in terms of Danny, the hotel acts really differently toward him. In the book, the hotel, the evilness, the spirits, whatever you want to call it, that's infested the Overlook Hotel, they want Danny. They want him for his abilities. They want him for his powers.
Right.
It's all about Danny. That's why you got the hedge mages going after him. That's why you got all this stuff, and they're trying to get him through John. You know what I mean? In the film, it seems like they want Jack more.
Yes.
That they want Jack, because then you got all these theories that, is Jack reincarnated as the original groundskeeper? Has he always been there? Is he, since he died, he turned into a ghost himself, and now he's there? It's about Jack. It's not about Danny. Danny's almost like the footnote. The whole Shining thing is almost like a footnote.
Scarifyer.
Hey Psychos, it's the Ace here. I hope you're enjoying this episode of Scarifyer, but I want to take a minute and let you know on another podcast. And not just for you horror fans, this is for you pro wrestling fans as well. It's called Wrestling with the Business. Now, Wrestling with the Business is a brand new podcast that takes an in-depth and critical look at the current world of professional wrestling. They cover all topics from all the major companies, TNA, Ring of Honor, AEW, and of course, the big one, the WWE. They also cover all of their shows, Raw, SmackDown, NXT, and so on. Wrestling with the Business is hosted by Matt Lambert, who is on top of all things new and current in the wrestling business. He's also a walking encyclopedia of wrestling history, second, in my opinion, only to the Professor Mike Tenay. His co-host and partner is Jeremy Bodette, a wrestling superfan who, along with his interest in studies and finances, politics, and business, adds a unique critique to how everything works in the world of professional wrestling and what makes it run. So check them out, guys. They're the newest and hottest tag team in the world of wrestling podcasts. And as always, keep kayfabe, follow the money, and Jeremy and Matt will wrestle with the business. All right, so moving forward a little bit. So this is going to upset some people who are not familiar with the book and have only watched the movie and who may be thinking about reading the book. Here's some spoilers about the book and movie. So, in the book, there's no twins. There's no Grady twins. Mm-mm. In the book, there's no bleeding elevator. In the book, there's no all work, no play makes Jack a dull boy. In the book, there's no hedge maids. What it is a garden filled with inanimate objects that come to life and speak to Danny. Mm-hmm. In the book, there is no "Here's Johnny." That is that is what I believe a Jack Nicholson one-liner.
Famously ad-libbed on the set by Jack.
And finally, the biggest discrepancy. Finale of the movie, as we know in the movie, Jack succumbs to the cold and freezes to death, whereas John in the book is lured back into the hotel to the boiler room where it explodes. Mm-hmm. Gov, give me your thoughts on all of that.
Well, sorry, people who are really into the iconography of The Shining, all movie. All the famous stuff that you see memes of, gifs of, whatever on T-shirts, all movies. And you know what? I think that perfectly demonstrates I'm just going to jump ahead to the ending comment about Jack getting frozen in the maze, and then in the book it's the boiler blows up, taking out the whole hotel with it. Perfectly describes Stephen King's hatred toward the movie.
Right.
He said, in my book, it ends in flames. In his movie, it ends in ice. You couldn't get more opposite, is what he's ultimately saying.
In the book, doesn't John kind of redeem himself?
Yeah, see, that he does. You're right. And that goes back to the difference in characters between John and Jack. John is an everyman. He's a good father. He has mistakes. He has his faults, but he is deep down a good father. And though he goes nuts and he starts, and one more big difference, in the book it's a roque mallet, not an axe.
Yes.
Which I always thought was just goofy. When I read it, I'm like, this is stupid. Anyway, that's just me. He is a good man. He's a good father, and he has a moment of redemption where he snaps out of it, and he tells Danny to run, get out, and he purposely doesn't empty the boiler, letting the hotel blow up with him inside. So there is. It is a redemption story at the end. The father who made all these mistakes got his redemption by saving his family. Not the case in the movie, by any means.
Jack failed, and he failed miserably.
No, he's nuts, he's insane, and he went down that swinging. he went down swinging that axe. And then some of the other differences. I'm leaning more toward the film on this one. I feel like the hedge maze is much more impactful than the lion hedge or the elephant, whatever animals they were. I can't remember right now that talked to Danny. Again, it's I get it. It's a ghost story. It's a haunted story. But it's just goofy.
Right.
It comes off as goofy. Other ones you said, I believe the line in the novel, when he's going after Wendy with the roque mallet, he doesn't beat down the first door. He unlocks the first door, and then when Wendy's in the bathroom, he takes the mallet to the door, and his big line is "boo," or something like that. So all credit to Jack Nicholson for a brilliantly out of context line.
Right. What really separates King from Kubrick is the line, "All work, no play makes Jack a dull boy." Again, King really focused on this traditional haunted house, type story, where the house is really messing with John, and the repeated "all work, no play makes Jack a dull boy" is Kubrick playing to the complete mental, psychological breakdown of Jack Torrance.
Yeah.
He's gone completely insane at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, and also the big difference is, again, the spirits play a much more bigger part in the novel. Again, Kubrick decided to make this more vague, much more ambiguous. Is it really haunted? We're led to believe at the end it really is. But, it could be just crazy visions. It could be, the insanity or the effects of cabin fever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly could be that, but, I almost look at it as that Jack is there, but he hasn't crossed the line. Mm-hmm. And the spirits push him across the line. Mm-hmm. Like, there's that one little strand of sanity that's holding Jack together, mm-hmm. and the spirits of the hotel cut it for him.
Yeah.
And enable him.
Then you can also, again, question the scenes where he really just goes off the deep end, and the infamous Lloyd bartender scene, which is in both versions. But in the book, it's made perfectly clear that it's a spirit who's twisting Jack's mind, and he's not drinking. He's drinking a cup of air. Right. You know what I mean? Whereas in the film, you don't know. Maybe Jack found the liquor cabinet somewhere. You know what I mean? And stuff like that. And he's using the alcohol to push him over the line where he wants to be.
Sure. But what we do know is that he gives the Joker laugh, which won him the part of the Joker in 1989's Batman.
So, the laugh that we sample in our show, you hear it every week.
Never rub another man's rhubarb.
Okay, Gov. So let's, we've compared, we've contrasted. Let's get an overall thought on the movie. Because it seems like, all due respect to the great Stephen King, I would have never read the damn book if it wasn't for this movie. Mm-hmm. So let me get your thoughts on the movie itself. Not rating it yet. We'll save that for later. But overall, what were your impressions? What did you like? What didn't you like? We can relate it back to the book, but really, give me an analysis on how you feel about this movie.
Well, personally, it's my favorite Stanley Kubrick movie, which I know a lot of people are going to be like, yeah, well, you're a horror movie guy, and one of your favorite actors in the world is Jack Nicholson. It's very true. But it has such an unnerving effect that really makes it scary, but in different ways. Like, I feel like if a younger person who's into jump scares or gore or something like that, they're gonna watch this movie and be very bored by it. They're not gonna really understand the impact that's what silence has.
Right.
You know what I mean? Just the long takes of just emptiness, and just vast nothingness, and that goes for both visuals and sound. Where all you hear is Danny's big wheel rolling down the carpet,
sure.
Or you hear the typing of Jack's typewriter and stuff like that. It has an almost classic film unnerving quality to it.
You feel isolated with them.
Exactly. He puts the audience in the film with the Torrances.
Right.
And that's what I love about it. I feel like it is almost unfair to compare both novel and film in that regards because they are so different. There's a reason why the film is called Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and then the novel's obviously called Stephen King's The Shining.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because they are two very different entities, and the film deserves its place as makes many a lists of greatest films of all time.
Sure.
Lists, and it absolutely deserves to be there. It's kind of ironic. At the time, Critics called it the big swing and the miss for Stanley Kubrick. They didn't get it. They didn't like it compared to his other works. They didn't even understand. It was almost like an Hitchcock situation. They couldn't understand why Alfred Hitchcock would want to do Psycho after his vast, successful career.
Right.
Same thing with this. Why would Stanley Kubrick ever want to do a Stephen King novel?
Sure.
Because both geniuses saw something in it, and they made something genius out of it.
Clearly, and we said it earlier that Stanley Kubrick saw something way different.
He latched onto a couple elements in the novel that he could use to help him tell the story he wanted to tell. He wanted to tell a story about the darkness in people and the fear of isolation and what that can do to somebody, and the traumaticness of a father wanting to kill his son.
Right.
That's what he wanted to tell. He found something in The Shining, the novel, that to spark that.
Right.
To give him the movie we have.
I love the movie. It is one of my favorite of all time. Yeah, I'm sure this is going to be hard to hear from some Amityville fans, some Conjuring fans, or whatever you are. I truly believe that this is the greatest ghost story of all time on film.
But is it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, and I say it is because by the end of the movie, we see the ghosts. It's it really has that great Kurt Siodmak, one of the original drafts of the Wolfman.
Yep.
You have Larry Talbot, who thinks he's a Wolfman, but you're never quite sure if he's actually turning into a Wolfman, and if it's all in his head. And then by the end, obviously, he is a werewolf.
Yeah.
Very similar to this movie. You're questioning this entire movie if this is just Jack in his head going absolutely insane, and you don't know, what's right, what's real, what's true, what's not.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, now Shelley Duvall she's seeing the blood in the elevators. She's seeing the ghosts, all the skeletons in the hallways, and so the hotel, the ghosts of the hotel reveal themselves to her as they've been revealing themselves to Jack.
But again, like, the great things about Kubrick films is that it's all interpretive.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So you can really kind of...
It's interpretive, sure, because a lot of people think that this movie is the cover-up to the Apollo moon landings.
Absolutely.
And we're not getting into that because that'd be a whole nother episode.
That'd be a whole nother 3 episodes.
Just to make your point of how interpretive this thing can be.
It really can be, and you can say that, Wendy... seeing the ghost and seeing the blood out of the elevator and seeing the twins, you can say, well, okay, that proves it, that the hotel really is haunted. Or I could say, or it's the effects of mass hysteria. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, but then what explains the photo at the end?
Exactly, it's interpretive.
Right.
You don't know what it really is. Was this... Here's another great theory. Again, I don't want to get into the theories because that's a whole nother episode, but I do want to throw this at you. What if this is the play that Jack's been writing? Bam.
Right.
So many different options.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So when I say, when you say it's a great ghost story, which, more entitled to that opinion, and you're right, I say, is it, or more specifically, is that what Kubrick was trying to make?
Right. I mean, who knows what Kubrick had in his head?
Only he did.
And
he probably couldn't even figure it out half the time.
Yeah. One thing I do want to throw out there, and I'm not saying it because we're such big fans of his, but the proof is in the pudding. This movie does not work or last this long without Jack Nicholson.
Absolutely not.
He carries this movie from start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, he had a good cast. We busted on Shelley Duvall a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
But the chemistry between her and Nicholson
mm-hmm.
really, really works.
Yeah.
For this movie. And the type of characters they were trying to portray.
They're a very real couple.
Yes.
There's nothing really Hollywood about them besides, the Hollywood juggernaut that is Jack Nicholson.
They're a real couple with real problems.
Right.
And it's obvious.
Like, one of the things about the miniseries, which, again, I hate pointing to, because I hate that fucking piece of shit, is that they may have captured the characters better, as in, like, more directly from the novel. But you got Steven Weber, and I can't remember who played Wendy. They're all, like, good-looking TV stars. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It doesn't seem real.
But, I mean, again, that's how they were portrayed in the book, and, is what it is.
Sure.
But, no, I mean, like, you really felt like this was a real, middle-class, struggling
family.
American couple.
Yeah.
And, but
Absolutely, Jack.
The power
the
of
man.
Jack Nicholson in this movie is just, I put it up there, next to Cuckoo's Nest as one of his greatest performances of all time. Easily top 3.
Yeah.
Easily. The guy just, what can you say about him?
I mean, that's what I meant earlier when, Stephen King's list of potential actors to play the role versus Kubrick's one and only choice. And as far as I'm aware, Jack took the role sight unseen. He just wanted to work with Kubrick.
Right.
He didn't care what
Yeah.
it was and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So with that, and he's able to turn in the performance that he turned in is...
Well, I mean, you know what, and as a Jack fan and knowing his work, for him to go back to the horror genre after leaving it, I mean, for those of you who don't know, Jack got his start doing indie movies with Roger Corman, and Boris Karloff. I mean, The Raven, The Terror. I mean, low budget Roger Corman movies, but he starts his career, his acting career, essentially in the horror genre, and to see him return to the horror genre like this, and such, I mean, an iconic, impactful. I mean, come on, guys, who doesn't know Here's Johnny?
Yeah.
I mean, it's parodied. If it's parodied by The Simpsons, it's pop culture, and it was parodied by The Simpsons.
Oh, yeah.
Here's Johnny! Don't! David Letterman!
Hi, David. I'm Grandpa.
Don't! I'm Mike Wallace, I'm Wally Schaefer, and I'm Ed Bradley. All this and Andy Rooney tonight on 60 Minutes!
So, flip side. I know it's been a little while for you, Ace, but what did you think of the novel from what you can remember?
Yeah, again, I read the novel after seeing the movie. It was a long time ago. I mean, when I watched the movie floored me, and for the longest time, I held The Shining at my tippy top of all-time favorite horror movies. And that's a different discussion of why other movies took its place. But, I mean, this movie, like everybody else, hit such a nerve with me that I couldn't get enough of. So, obviously you go and find the book. It's a great book. I mean, listen, Stephen King, man, for doing what he's been doing for 40, 50 plus years, and to not only still be writing books and having great ideas, but I mean, to write books that are an inch or two fucking thick and very small print and in such detail is absolutely mind-blowing. I wish I had my pinky had the creativity that he had. I mean, because I can barely write a paragraph in extreme detail and not get bored.
Yeah.
But as far as The Shining went, it wasn't my favorite Stephen King read. It didn't take me long to figure out that it was drastically different from the movie that I loved. And and like much of Stephen King's work, it was long and it dragged.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to get through it, which is why when Dr. Sleep came out, I told myself, well, it's been well over 10 years since I read The Shining.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to read The Shining first, get these characters back in my head, and then read Dr. Sleep. Well, I've done neither. And Dr. Sleep is on my fucking bookshelf for probably, 5 or 6 years now.
Oh, good plan.
So, but I do plan on reading it before the movie comes out, which probably still won't happen.
Yeah. Well, for the Gov on the novel, I honestly can't remember what I was exposed to first. This is one of those movies where you just can't really pinpoint the first time you watched it. It was always around.
Sure.
So, and when I was younger, I want to say around my middle school days, I was into this total Stephen King fix. I would go to the school library, take out any Stephen King novel I can find, and just read it. Didn't matter what it was, from Carrie to Dreamcatcher to anything. So I remember reading the book for the first time, and as I was reading it, I don't remember comparing it to the film.
Right.
As I was reading it. So that either tells me I read the book first, or the book was just so vastly different that it didn't even register.
Right.
But what?
You see, I got the book immediately after I saw the movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I wanted more of it, personally. And again, for me, like you, I can't remember exactly when I watched The Shining the first time.
Yeah.
But I remember,
You knew it was the movie first.
Well, yeah, I know that because, it's how I got introduced to much of this world of horror, is people telling me it was the scariest movie of all time.
Yeah.
The infamous line, it's the scariest movie of all time. So I check it out, and it didn't disappoint, for sure. Unlike others and most. So, yeah. Unlike you, where you probably read the book first because you were in the Stephen King thing, I know I watched the movie first and went out to get the book right after.
The movie inspired you to go read the book.
Yes.
See, I don't recall that. I recall that with other Stephen King novels. I know I saw Carrie first, the original Brian De Palma movie, and then I went out and got the novel. I think I did the same thing. I definitely did the same thing with It for the Tim Curry miniseries. But
I read Salem's Lot first.
Did you?
Yes. And that's my favorite King book by far.
That's a good one. That is a really good one. Definitely for another episode. But for some reason, The Shining, I can't recall which. It's very possible I watched the movie first. It's very possible I watched the novel first. I do know this. I was increasingly bored by the novel. It is, as you said, it's long, drawn out. It's very wordy. It's very descriptive. You spend a lot of time with these characters just talking to each other before anything supernatural or horrific even happens, which, again, I guess for book lovers and especially Stephen King lovers, they love taking that time to really get to know the characters, to because he sets a sense of these characters like they're your next door neighbors or something like that, which is great. However, when you have something as long as The Shining as a book, as it is a thick book, it's really hard to sit through or read through. The novel is almost twice as large, but I don't know, it flows better in my opinion. Or maybe the subject material is a little bit more interesting instead of haunted house. You know what I mean? And again, putting down that fucking terrible miniseries from '97. A lot of people criticize the miniseries of being drawn out and boring and stupid and bland. That's the book.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's what. No disrespect to the Shining book lovers, because I know you guys are out there. In my opinion, because we all have this crazy fucking thing called free will. The book is really boring to me and really drawn out. I've only read it the one time years and years ago, and then just out of sheer curiosity to see if I liked it better or not, listened to it again. That's right. I didn't even read it. I got it on Audible. And listening to it is still pretty boring. You know what I mean?
I gotta admit, Other than clips, I don't think I've ever watched the made-for-TV series.
You don't. You don't need to.
I wasn't interested. I mean, again, nothing can, because I know nothing's going to get, in my mind, can get compared to Jack Nicholson.
No, but to be fair, it's not supposed to be.
I understand that, but
they still call him Jack in the miniseries, and I think they even call him Jack in the novel, even though he's introduced as John.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I have to double check that. It's an entirely different character. It's not entirely different movie, but it is more of the novel than Kubrick's movie ever was. So you can't really comparing them. It's apples and oranges.
Right.
It's John versus Jack,
Yeah.
All right, and the final bell rings for King versus Kubrick, so it's now time for our rating at Scarifyer. But before we get into our personal opinions, what did you say out there on social media and Google?
Well, this is a special episode, Gov, because not only do we have one rating, we have two ratings. So, starting with the book by Stephen King, Goodreads gives The Shining by Stephen King a 4.2 out of 5.
Wow.
Barnes & Nobles gives the book The Shining by Stephen King a 4.5 out of 5.
Whoa.
And Books A Million, it's a clean sweep, 5 out of 5. And all you maniacs out there in Google land, 94% of you like this book. So clearly, the Gov and I are in the wrong in this argument.
Clearly, we have to reread it.
Yes. So, I mean, wow.
Well, again, that's that wonderful thing called free will and opinion. You're allowed to have it.
I mean, and let's not take away this. It's considered a literary masterpiece.
No, I know that. I'll never take that away from it either. And again, I won't even say it's one of Stephen King's weaker novels. I don't think it is. I just think there's a lot better.
Right. So, let's hear it. Gov, your score, the book,
well,
The Shining.
After that, I feel like I want to, tip it more positively. Out of 5, I'll give it a 3. I'll give it a 3, and that might be generous to it, but it is a good masterpiece of a book. It doesn't really spark my fancy, but that's okay. It doesn't have to. It does great with its character development. It does great with setting up the dysfunctionality of a couple. It does wonders for the metaphor and the hazards of alcoholism and the effects on that,
right.
and the father and son relationships. It does its job. What it was setting out to do, it does it properly. So I will be generous despite, the poor pacing in my opinion, and give it a 3 out of 5. Why not?
Yeah, I give it a 3.5.
Okay.
It's not my favorite Stephen King book. Especially after coming to it after seeing the movie.
Mm-hmm.
However, I do like the old-fashioned ghost story. It's long, but I mean, there's some good stuff in it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a fun read. Once considering how long it took me to get through it.
Right.
But yeah, I give the book 3.5.
All right. Woo! Saved ourselves there.
So here we go. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, starring Jack Nicholson. The Internet Movie Database gives this movie an 8.4 out of 10.
There we go.
Rotten Tomatoes gives it an 86%, kind of low.
Yeah.
And even lower than that, Metacritic gives it a 66.
Whoa! What happened?
Yeah, I don't know what went on there.
Well, you know what it is? It's critics. Critics have a hard time with this movie.
Right.
They do.
And the Maniacs out in Google Land, 88%.
All right.
Like Stanley Kubrick's The Shining.
Mm-hmm.
Gov, this is a movie near and dear to our hearts. Give me your score.
4.5. How about that? 4.5 for Jack Nicholson, just for being Jack Nicholson. No, it's you want to talk about masterpiece.
Yes.
This is a masterpiece. It's kind of interesting to call. You can call The Shining a lot of things. You can call the book better. You can call the film better. But no matter what, you got to call both of them a masterpiece.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's a feat that is rarely reached in anything. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? The film works on so many levels. It works as a horror film. It works as a ghost film. It works as a psychological thriller. It works as a paranoia film. It works on all cylinders of what it's trying to do. And Stanley Kubrick had this weird notion in his head from just reading a few pages of the novel, and he just took it and turned it into his own vision and ran with it. And with the inclusion of Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, and the other supporting cast members, it created something spectacular that you'll never see again.
Yeah, I agree. I'm throwing out a 4.5 as well. This movie, one of the all-time classics. Jack Nicholson is just out of this world in this movie. Mm-hmm. Not many movies do, but this one, when I was first told about it, lived up to its height as being a terrifying movie, one of the scariest of all time. And like you said, it's a classic, from start to finish. And it's something that will never be repeated.
It really won't. And it's really interesting to hear people say that this was Stanley Kubrick's ultimate misfire, because I don't think he missed at all.
No.
You know what I mean? Again,
I know. I mean, I
that's
get,
mostly critics and stuff like that.
1001 Space Odyssey. I get it.
Yeah,
but
compared to his other stuff, it has the Hitchcock effect of of all the things he's done, then he's got this here. But I think it fits perfectly in his lexicon of work.
Clockwork Orange.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I prefer The Shining over all of them. Mm-hmm. And I had the honor of meeting Malcolm McDowell last year.
Yeah.
So I'm clearly a fan of Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
Both book and movie.
Mm-hmm.
But something about The Shining that just separates from all of his other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's just on a whole different, higher level.
Yeah.
And I mean, is that Jack Nicholson, or is it lightning in a bottle? I mean, it's really hard to tell.
And with most of, if not most, all of Stanley Kubrick's works, it's interpretive. You decide what it is. And, and then in the big debate, the big grudge match of King versus Kubrick, I got to call this one a stalemate.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I think that's the only thing that's fair to do. I don't think either one is better than the other. They're two great things that you should look into yourself.
Yeah, judge for yourself. I mean, and again, talking about the movie, I mean, like you said, how can you touch the movie?
No.
Well, how can you say Stephen King was wrong? He wrote the damn thing.
I know. You can't really. It's an unfair question to say who did The Shining better.
Yeah.
Because you got one man who made a fantastic, great, masterful film that's on every top 20 greatest films of all times list, and then you got the man who wrote the novel. That's an unfair fight, and I can understand Stephen King of why he doesn't like it, and in harsher terms he said he hates it, and it's the film out of all his book to screen adaptations he hates the most. I mean, hell, it drove him to convince a studio to give him millions of dollars so he can go on a coke binge called Maximum Overdrive, because he was so convinced that no one could do his work right but himself. So
I mean, but in fairness, I think he had every right to be upset. I mean, I'd like to think that I'd probably be a little miffed if my labor of love was changed so drastically.
Yeah.
And just something that I believed in and loved was just disregarded for another creator's artistic taste.
He describes the film as a beautiful car on the outside, but under the hood there's no engine. And I respect that.
Right.
That's the way he sees it. Writers do have a hard time with other people, outside forces, adapting their work, especially when they have little to no say over it.
Sure.
It is a tough thing. But what we do know, based on this side-by-side comparison, whether it's film or book, what can we say but we all shine on? We hope you enjoyed this archived episode, The Shining King versus Kubrick on Scarifyer. And what better way to follow it up than with the sequel, Dr. Sleep, the recently released film where the critics loved it, but the audience didn't show up. We're going to talk about it here on the next Scarifyer.